Hi folks, we're Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about evil or badness and how we measure it and how we relate to it and hold it up and how we use it for propaganda purposes and so on. And if we look at the sort of the bad folks of history, we're talking sort of mass murderers being probably a decent indicator of badness and evil. Then we see Hitler appears in the overall scheme of things. I think he appears as sixth on the scale. So there's plenty of folks in front of Hitler to supplant him as a number one. Yet Hitler, Nazi, fascist are held up as the epitome of the gold standard, if you will. If you want to identify evil with an offhand remark, used to accuse someone of being Hitler, a fascist, or a Nazi, you're good to go. You've settled it. Whereas you go, oh yeah, you're Lenin, you're a Bolshevik, you're on the Politburo. People would look at you and, what the fuck are you talking about? So it doesn't have the same resonance. So you're like Pol Pot. Who? Yeah, he was Cambodia. Where? So Hitler's held up as the standard, and again, fascist, Nazi. You want to say someone's bad? Yeah, fascist. And I went to some years ago. I went to a socialist meeting, and they were talking about prescribed policies. And what I thought was rather amusing is all these different socialist speakers were all accusing each other of being fascist. It's something that rolls off the socialist tongue, the communist tongue, very easily. I think we should do such and such a policy. You're a fascist. So they were calling each other fascists just as vehemently as they call everyone else a fascist. It's the go-to. It's the first go-to when you disagree with somebody. So let's talk about the relativity of badness and how we identify it. And Hitler gets a bit of a bum rap, really, given that all the ones in front of him are unknown to nearly everybody. I was at just to give you an idea of how Hitler's become the gold standard for this. I was at this was like a sports event, and this guy I know, one of his kids is retarded quite badly. She sits there with drooling and all this sort of things in a bad way. And anyway, the German team came into the arena, and we were sitting there, and she was sitting in between me and her parents, and the German team came in. It was announced over the intercom, and when she heard the word German, she sort of looked, and some cogs in her head started. Apparently, she's badly retarded. Her head, cogs started turning. She looked at me, and go, Germany, Hitler. And just kept saying Hitler and over and over. So clearly, it's something that's sort of penetrated the whole universe, including those with IQs of 50 or 60. So let's have a look at this in some more detail. Why is Hitler being specially selected for this treatment? Why is it not Lenin or Mao or Stalin or Pol Pot, Genghis Khan, and all those sort of guys? Well, I guess there's a few reasons. I suppose he's more modern and more recent than the other examples, or not Pol Pot. Pol Pot was what, the 1970s. So now what we need to go back, I suppose, into German history in the 1920s and just have a little look there. The communists worldwide and the sort of super activist socialists, and they kind of merged and demerged and merged again and demerged. So there was a lot of crossing over there. But remember, the Soviet Union was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Now, whether you want to call it Bolshevik, as in the popular name of the political party that kicked off the Russian Revolution, who was socialist, or whether you want to call it communist, given the more ideological bent of socialism, that we can debate that as a separate issue. Consider communist and socialist. Socialist suggests that there's the public are encouraged to support it and do support it, particularly at the workers' level through trade unions. Communist implies, certainly as it's happened throughout history, communist implies something that's imposed, a government that's imposed at the point of a gun through revolution and things like that. So that's kind of the difference that we can see in certainly 20th century Europe and beyond during those days. But during Germany in the 1920s, the communists were worldwide, and if you get onto YouTube and put up the song, the Internationale, and it's the French word, so it's an E after the L, so it's international with the letter E on the end, and listen to the song. It's, quite a stirring song. The tune's not too bad, actually. Workers of the world unite. We're going to throw off our chains and beat the shit out of those naughty bad bosses and all this sort of thing. That'll give you a grounding to the sort of attitudes. The words of the song give you a grounding, the sort of attitudes that were prevalent in the early 1900s and through into the 1920s. Now, Germany was perceived as, given it was in such a wretched state after the end of First World War, government had broken down, the police weren't really in control, gangs of goons were roaming the streets, so it was almost arbitrary law in a lot of places. So it was perceived that Germany was ripe for communist revolution, and there were so many attempts, regional and local and national, so many attempts at communist revolution, whether using the workers as goons through the trade unions or all the trade unions were infiltrated with socialist cells and so on. So it was a real hotbed, and there was very little continuity in society. Inflation was rampant. And it was really the late 1920s when things started to settle down. So in 1927, 28, things started to settle down a bit in Germany. But then with the Wall Street crash, the loans that were coming in from the international financial groups were withdrawn, and Germany plunged back into a sort of a recessionary type situation, and the social disruption, political uncertainty was running rampant. But when you look at the state Germany was in at the time, and you look at the names of the people, you look at all these socialists, all these uprisings, all these little mini regional revolutions that were going on, and they're all over the place in Germany. I mean, there's one happening every few weeks. You look at the names of the people on those lists. Jewish people or Jewish names were not quite all, but you're getting on for all of them. And of those ones that were the leaders of these communist revolutions, they were not only nearly all Jewish, but there was a colossal overrepresentation of gays and lesbians, or homosexuals and lesbians. The Spartacist revolution or uprising in 1919 as being, Rosa Luxemburg, a revered hero of the left. She was a Jewish lesbian school teacher, for goodness sakes. Karl Liebknecht, and the list goes on of Jewish people. Again, many homosexual and lesbians. So this was considered to be, they were the torchbearer, the ideological torchbearers, the standard bearers. So when Hitler went after the Jews, or the Nazis generally went after the Jews, it was very much for these revolutions that were fresh in their mind. And they asked the same questions we may ask today. Why is it that those people pushing trans ideology, why is it these people pushing that slavery should be treated as a raw, open wound today? And why is it that, the vast majority of gender, race hustlers, trans hustlers, LGBTQ, why are they even today Jewish teachers and so on? And writers, and as they were in Germany during those times. So when Hitler went after these people, he was going after a certain class of people that intersected with, firstly, just the Jewish diaspora and the Jews at the time. And today, they were diligent, conscientious record keepers of all slights against Jews, real or imagined. They kept books on it, whether it be Jewish Romanians, Jewish Germans, Jewish French. Copious records were kept of the slights or the hurts or or the whatevers that were against the Jewish people. So they want to keep things very, very much alive, and again, keep the open wound bleeding out, for all eternity. So Hitler went after the Jews, but also went after communists, socialists, homosexuals, lesbians, gypsies, of course, and that class of people represent the Jews, the oppressed, the desire to defeat capitalism, and so on. So these two groups found common cause. The homosexuals, lesbians, LGBTQ, and itinerant travellers, the gypsies, and the communist revolutionaries, and of course the Jewish diaspora. So they all found common cause in one, and Hitler managed to offend all of them, and thus is held up as the epitome. Now, Stalin and Lenin went after Jews as well, particularly Jews that were traditional, they spoke Yiddish in the house, that type of thing. These were considered very suspect. So, and they were on the other side, radical revolutionaries like Trotsky. And again, if you look at all the Jews in the Bolshevik Party originally, although Stalin got rid of most of them, they were useful at raising finance, which is, I think, why they were tolerated. But they were, Trotsky or Bronstein, as his name really was. Trotsky was like a sort of I don't know, pet name or something like that. But he was a, without him, I'm not sure that the Communist Party, Bolshevik Communist Party in Russia would have survived. It was his stolid defense of the ideology and how communism should be applied, and his brutality in killing all those who would oppose that ideology, and his organization of the communist armies during the revolution and the civil war that ensued was probably, if he wasn't there, and he hadn't done that, someone that committed and that energetic in pursuing it, if he hadn't been there to do that, there's a good chance that the Russian Revolution or the Communist Revolution would have fallen over. Nonetheless, so Hitler just managed to offend all those groups which kind of coalesced into international communism and socialism and so on. Now, Hitler also went after the many Soviet cells, the Russian Soviet communist cells that were in Germany, and there were plenty of them, went after those as well, and evicted them or had them killed or shut down and so on. And doing it again, some he let go just to be on decent terms with the Soviet Union. But when Germany invaded Russia, these people were rounded up and either killed or imprisoned. So that's something that deeply offended the Soviets, and they want their propaganda machine was trying to keep Hitler very much at the forefront of he's the ultimate expression of evil, and they didn't want people to look at Stalin or didn't want people to look at Lenin and Trotsky and the butchery they'd committed. They wanted all the focus to be on Hitler. So the Jews, the communists, the socialists, the homosexuals, the lesbians, the school teachers, the academics, the writers, they all came together at one amorphous mass. We all vote that Hitler is the baddest of the baddest guys ever, and so that he is now just the invocation of his name is now the expression of evil. But what about Mao killed, tens of millions more than Hitler did? Yeah, who cares? But Stalin killed tens of millions more than Hitler did. Who gives a fuck? Lenin killed millions more than Hitler. So what? But Stalin and Lenin and everything, they went after the Jews. Well, why can't we? No, it's Hitler we're putting out front there. Now, all of these guys are bad. It doesn't mean any good, but we're looking at the relativity of it here. If we look at the amount of people killed, then again, Hitler's about 6th on the international bad list. There's plenty of those before him. If you look at relativity to population, for example, the Jews and Gypsies in Germany, the homosexuals, the communist activists, and that sort of thing, they represented less than 1% of the German population. So, whereas Pol Pot, the dictator of Cambodia, is killed something in the region of a quarter, 25%. Some say even higher than that, of the population of Cambodia. It was so arbitrary that anybody that was wearing spectacles was considered to be a counter-revolutionary intellectual, and they were killing people just because they were wearing glasses. Fuck. So Pol Pot should be held up, is he? But no one knows who the fuck Pol Pot is. Cambodia, where's that? Is that a country, or is that the name of the guy who's down the road there working at the delicatessen? No one knows who Pol Pot is. So we really need, I think, to reconsider the teaching of history there. Does that mean Hitler's not bad? Of course not. I mean, he's a bad dude, but many people were killed and so on. Now, there's another strain of thought that says, well, you see, Hitler's a little bit different because Hitler did bad things because he wanted to do bad. Whereas Mao and Trotsky and Lenin and Stalin, sure, they did bad things. Sure, tens of millions of people died, but they were trying to do good things. They were just ideological, starry-eyed, people that were trying to do good things. Okay, so they had to kill a few 100 million people. Who gives a fuck? They were trying to do good things. So this is an interesting sort. I kind of see the point in a twisted way, insofar as someone's trying to do something good and it just doesn't work out, and there's a lot of casualties from it. That's not what I would subscribe to. Stalin's view and Lenin's view, Trotsky's view, were we're going to impose this ideology at the point of a gun. If you don't like it, we will kill you. And given it was imposed, there was no attempt to convert the populace, or no reasonable attempt to convert the populace to saying, well, look, this is how it's going to be better. This is how it's going to improve your life. Your life will be better because of. Now, the very poorest peasants at the lowest bottom of the end of the scale probably did do better ultimately through communism, but really no one else did. You get the usual sort of privileged party hack goons that do well. Ideological commissars were well rewarded. Propagandists were well rewarded in the Soviet Union as they are in China. But people that worked hard, saved lives, did a good job with this, so they weren't rewarded. So you had to, in order to be well rewarded and well looked after, you had to perpetuate the myth of a superior ideology. We see it today in the West. A diversity, equity, inclusion director can be paid, 2 or even 3 times what a senior bridge building engineer is paid. So even today now in the West, the propagandists and the facilitators are paid way more than anyone that does productive, useful work. Work that does improve the lives of the people around them. The diversity directors, they're not improving anyone's life, maybe their own. All they're doing is facilitating the globalization project and being handsomely rewarded for it. And these are people that wouldn't be paid, they'd be paid like a tenth of this in the real world if they had to compete for jobs on the basis of their productive output. So coming back to the badness thing, so Hitler just managed to annoy the international socialists, the international Jewish cabal, the international LGBTQ, all these cabals that became disproportionately powerful in the years to come, and Hitler managed to piss them all off, and this is held up now that he's the gold standard of evil. Whereas, the ruthless persecution of the Jews by the Soviets, or certain sects of Jews, not all of them, and by Lenin as well, was untrustworthy, this sort of thing. This was very much a case of very selective apportioning of blame, and the idea of the moniker of evil is on Hitler exclusively, and very few of these. Only people that are reasonably versed in history would know. You stop the average person in the street, who's the baddest guy ever? It's Hitler, and they won't even know the other names. If you rattle the other names off, they'd stare at you blankly. They just wouldn't know. So Hitler's achieved sort of a mythical ideological position again because he managed to piss off the groups that hold unusual power today. Also, the groups that are used to create social division, the LGBT, feminism, all this sort of stuff. Then Hitler's seen as, one of Hitler's things when the Second World War started is that he didn't want German women being forced to work for the war effort. Young women before they were married, fine, if they wanted to work, and many did. But women shouldn't be forced to work, was Hitler's view. Now, this has been flipped around to say, well, there you go, shows Hitler's oppression of women, because he wouldn't let women, he stopped women from working, that fucking evil motherfucker. But that wasn't anything of the sort. He just didn't. Now, in Britain and the Soviet Union and so on, women were, forced is maybe too strong a term, but forced is certainly a case in some of those places. Women were forced to work and were publicly shamed for not doing so to assist the war effort, where it was really sort of early 1943 before Hitler started to accept that he was going to have to encourage women to work, things like factories and so on. And so, you could hardly point to Hitler being an oppressor of women, but this is how it's depicted today. Hitler was very reluctant to stop consumer goods being manufactured for women. Things like, women's clothing and cosmetics, things like that. So he wanted that to continue. And when his advisor said, look, we need to stop production of that in order to make weapons and armaments and so on. It was only with some reluctance, and he had to be pushed and pestered for quite a while before he'd agree to it, because he didn't want women to go without those things. So now, look, recently there was a journalist I think it was in Seattle, in the United States, and Northwest United States, and the journalist said something, well, why do we have statues of Mao and Lenin and all that sort of thing, given the deaths that they were directly and indirectly responsible for. We wouldn't have a statue of Hitler there, but why do we have statues of all the others? Genghis Khan, Stalin, Lenin, Trotsky. Why do we have statues of all these guys, but not of Hitler? If we're going to say mass murder and this sort of thing, persecution of Jews is a bad thing, then why don't we take all the statues down? Why is only one sort of statue considered as you just can't do it, whereas the others are acceptable? So he raised that point, which comes back to the relativity issue I'm talking about in this essay. Are all these statues should there be no statues of these sort of people, or should the if we're going to celebrate them, what are we going to celebrate them for? Or are we going to recognize their historical existence and learn the lessons of history? I think it's important to learn the lessons of history. I wouldn't attempt to pull down the statue of Genghis Khan or Stalin or something like that. Not because I think they're good guys or bad guys, but they are part of history. They did exist. They are part of the history that we need to study. Now, I was sort of interested to read, when some people are supposedly arrested for hate crimes, the very desperate prosecutors will say something like, oh yeah, well, we went into the guy's house and he had a book about Hitler. That shows he's a fucking bad guy. But when you actually look at the details, he had a book about the history of the Second World War, and if it's a history of the Second World War, it's going to mention Hitler somewhere, and so and have a photograph or a picture or something of Hitler, and the prosecutors are so fucking desperate to paint these people as being evil, they'll get this book about the Second World War, not about Hitler, not revering Hitler, just a book about the Second World War, and they'll go to a page with a Hitler photograph, and they'll take a photograph of that. There, see, he's fucking evil, fascist Nazi. Well, no, it's a history book, for fuck's sake. And so we live in a time when, given that Hitler's the gold standard for evil, that everybody wants to accuse everyone else of being a Hitler. But in reality, we should be looking at that. This guy is part of our human history, and we need to recognise that and without prejudice, just look at it and say, well, here are the bad things the guy did, and then look at the bad things that the Stalins did, and the Lenins and the Trotskys did, and we study the Maos and so on. That we study that as being things that did happen in history that were factual, and recognise that, so we learn the lessons from it. You know, one of the things that drives me crazy was the Nazis set up a special court. They called it the People's Court, but there's a division in there to effectively persecute Jews. And so they, in order to get at the Jews, but give it the veneer of legal legitimacy, they would fiddle around with due legal process. So they would arbitrarily detain the Jewish person based on the allegation of somebody, a Gentile, based on an allegation. He looked at me, or this or that, or something vague, and then they drag the Jewish guy into court. They bounce him around. They decide that the court hearing 20 miles away. They wouldn't let the guy call witnesses, or they would refuse to accept the evidence of witnesses, and this and that, and did all sorts of things to prevent the guy from mounting a defense, the Jewish guy from mounting a defense. And this was a blatant attempt to ensure they got a conviction. And now these lessons, this is a lesson from history to be learnt. Look at how they persecuted these people by denying them due legal process and allowing for arbitrary accusation and arrest. This is how they got after them. And look at today how they're treating people in the United States, Donald Trump among them. These vague, arbitrary crimes are supposed to be committed, courts where he's not permitted to produce evidence, where his due legal process is actively and aggressively frustrated by activists who are doing the exact same thing as the Nazis did to the Jews. Many of the prosecutors and activists around, judges too, are Jewish, and yet they haven't learned the lessons of history. So I think there needs to be statues of everyone around to remind us of what went wrong in the past, and so we don't make those same mistakes again. Because today we're making exactly the same mistakes we made through history, and fairly recent history at that. And we're just not learning those lessons. And it drives me crazy thinking about all those lessons from history we should have, must have, and need to learn and remember, and yet we're forgetting all of it. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.